Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session, New Medical Staff Models for a Changing World, presented as part of the 36th Annual NAMS Conference and Exhibition. My name is Katie Engel, and I'm a Director at Large for the Western region, and that includes California. As a brief reminder, I would like to ask you to silence all cell phones and pagers, and to be sure to fill out the session evaluation at the end of the program and turn it into one of our room monitors. Also, please remember that in most cases, these sessions are being recorded. So please step up to the microphone if asking any questions at the end of the presentation so everyone can hear and the questions are recorded as part of the session. I'm very pleased today to introduce our presenter for this session, Linda Haddad. Linda Haddad is a senior partner of the law firm of Horty, Springer & Mattern in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a senior fellow of the Estes Park Institute, and a fellow in the Allegheny County Bar Association. She has presented in hundreds of educational conferences, including programs conducted by the American Health Lawyers Association, medical societies, hospital associations, and various hospital and healthcare systems. She has been included regularly in the Best Lawyers in America and Pennsylvania Super Lawyers. Ms. Haddad serves on the board of the Volunteers in Medicine Institute and is a past chair of the board of directors of PHT Services Limited, a healthcare risk management organization based in Columbia, South Carolina. She contributes to the Horty Springer publications relating to health law, including Action Kit for Hospital Law, the Medical Staff Leadership Online Resource, and Action Kit for Hospital Trustees. She works extensively on board and physician leadership issues, medical staff bylaws, physician contracts, and employment relationships, medical staff mergers, system credentialing, and physician organization matters. In addition, her work involves credentialing questions, including health, behavior, and competence issues. She has served as counsel in scores of medical staff due process matters. Ms. Haddad regularly advises hospitals and physician leaders on matters such as mission credentialing and physician system integration strategies and processes. Please help me welcome Linda Haddad.
Thanks, Katie. All those things Katie mentioned that I do, Katie does too. But Katie leads a whole medical staff through it every time she does it. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys, for being here. I've been here for a few days now and gotten to talk to many of you in person. I'm so happy to be here. I tell many of you this when I get a chance to be with you personally, but this is a very important, I speak all over the place all the time. This one's very important to me because I know exactly what you do. My whole career, I've worked with you guys. I know the extent to which you help recruit and shape medical staff leaders. I know that everything we do, working through the bylaws, working through the problem cases, you guys are on the front lines. I know that sometimes your good work is not rewarded with the praise it deserves. We take a lot of grief when things don't go well, or inevitably there will be some people unhappy about what you do. I want you to know we know exactly what you do, and we really appreciate it. And we know the extent to which your good work makes life better for everybody who comes into your hospital. So thank you for that, and thank you for being with me for this next hour when I talk about this organization that you are so integral with, this patient of ours, the medical staff. The medical staff, how many of you were at Dr. Sagan's session this morning? Okay, so you have a sense of it. I'm not going to repeat anything he said except to the thing that's absolutely essential for you all to know who weren't in the morning session. Here's the deal. He told you the medical staff has been around for 100 years, and almost, and that it was invented by the American College of Surgeons, by physicians for the single purpose of finding a way to inject quality into the work that physicians were doing in hospitals. By the beginning of this century, physicians were well trained. One-on-one, physicians had good relationships with their patients, but nobody was assuming overall responsibility for the quality of care. And that's why the medical staff was created. And keep that in mind, because at the end, as I'm running through with you some models for the medical staff, I would suggest to you that the purpose is exactly the same. So your challenge when you go back is to take the issue that the American College of Surgeons started with. How do we take the care that's provided in the organization by our members and do the best we can to bring quality to it? The ACS's conclusion was essentially you do it a couple ways. Remember, we told you about that 5-paragraph minimum standard that they created, but it boils down to two things: good credentialing, good peer review. So, when you guys were responding to some of the questions in Dr. Sagan's session this morning, some of you indicated that things weren't going as well as you wished in those areas in your medical staff. And there's a lot of anxiety among physicians because there are so many changes, and your medical staff looks so different because some are employed and some aren't physicians, and everything is changing. And it reminds me of a story, to put it in context. Two priests standing along the side of the road, holding up a sign that said, "The end is near. Change your path before it's too late." And a motorist comes speeding by and says, "Get off the road, you jerks. Get back into your church." And within seconds, they hear a screeching of the brakes and a crash. And one priest said to the other, "I told you, our sign should just say the bridge is out." And I think that's where we are with the medical staff. You know that you have in your organization groups of highly trained physicians who want the very best for their patients. The concept of the medical staff is taking care of all of those patients. What distinguishes your work and the work of those who are willing to become the medical staff leaders from every other physician on the medical staff is not their interest in quality. Everybody wants quality. What distinguishes the leadership is that they have taken on, you have taken on, the responsibility for the quality of care of everybody's patients. And that's what the medical staff does. Perhaps at this moment, not as well as you would hope because of some of the transitions, but let's just take a look at how that might change. We'll start with the objectives and we'll look at whether or not there's a better way to deal with this. The medical staff has gone through lots of changes. Todd talked about the committees, the departments, the bureaucracy that sometimes makes it hardly seem worthwhile. And you get sued by people for antitrust or negligence or whatever, and so there's always the fear of litigation that runs through it. But what's going on now? So many of the physicians don't care about the medical staff organization. And it's hard to lead an organization when you look around and there's nobody behind you. You lose some of your enthusiasm for it or some of the sense that you can get something done. And paralysis by democracy is not a new thing, but it's perhaps manifested now as more and more physicians are not coming to the hospital, not participating in the organization. What I meant by that is medical staffs have had this sense that we can't do anything unless everybody agrees. You know the joke. What's a medical staff vote of 99-1? A tie. You think everybody has to agree before you make some progress. Do you know how many people really need to agree before you make a change? The square root of n. Those who have studied nominal group theory say the number of people you need to get on board in order to effectuate a change is the square root of n. So, if you have a medical staff of 100 people, you need 10 people on board. If you have a medical staff of 400 people, you need 20 people on board. If you have a medical staff of 1,000, you need more. But I don't know exactly how many. But you need not as many as you think. You need the dream. ACS handed us the dream on a silver platter. You all have inherited it. The dream is to make care as good as it can be. And oh, there's another goal of the medical staff. When the medical staff is as good as it can be, it gives every physician on the medical staff the best chance to be successful. And that matters too. So that's what we're working with here. This is what's going on. You've got too few physicians who are doing all the work. You have tried to engage other physicians, so you sentence everybody to service on some committee or another, but it's not with great joy that they do this. Now, we could always have a meeting. Are you lonely? Tired of working on your own? You can point with a stick, impress colleagues. It's the practical alternative to work. You know, a decade or so ago, I worked with you guys when you were asking, how do we streamline the medical staff? How do we restructure the medical staff? And here's brilliant us. And we say, oh, we have all the answers you need. All you need are fewer departments, fewer committees, fewer meetings. And there you go, and now nobody knows anybody. Because at least the forced meetings caused people to have an opportunity to talk to one another. So to some extent, we reduced the bureaucracy, which we were really working with you trying to do. To another extent, perhaps we contributed to the diaspora, what your medical staff used to be, and now it's scattered everywhere. And now one of the things that we know is that the organizations benefit from getting to know each other, from sharing ideas. I'm not going to suggest we go back to the old days with all the committees and all the departments and monthly meetings, and you have to find somebody to take minutes. No, not that. But I am suggesting there's an opportunity for people who share these interests to find a way to do it together, and keep that in mind too. So here's the issue. Can this patient be saved? Sure, you guys save people all the time. It just won't be what it used to be. Peter Senge is a great consultant. You've probably read some of his business books, but one of the things that he said that I think is very relevant to what we're doing is when the pace of change on the outside exceeds the pace of change on the inside, the end is near. And holy smokes, can you imagine any more change in healthcare than what's going on around us? I mean, this, depending upon your perspective, is a very exciting, very promising, very terrifying time. And we're not going to thrive in it if we just try to tweak our existing models and our existing practices. Is the medical staff you have right now designed to accomplish what the American College of Surgeons dreamed of? I don't think that's the relevant question anymore. I think the relevant question is, can it be? What does it mean in 2012, 2013 to be able to accomplish this? And this is part one of where I said, folks have to get together. You have to have ways to meet and talk about this, because the other thing Mr. Senge says is when, in the absence of a dream, pettiness prevails. There wouldn't be any pettiness in your organization, would there? When people lose sight of what they're trying to accomplish, we don't necessarily spend our time as productively as we'd like. I mean, if you ask your medical staff, why do you exist? Why do we have this organization? What would they say? Joint Commission makes us, CMS makes us. I'll bet you there aren't very many who know the history of the American College of Surgeons and the interest in improving care generally. There are some people on your medical staff, I know this because I've asked, there are some people on your medical staff that thinks that the medical staff exists to protect the interests of the medical staff. They do. I mean, that's like saying Congress exists to get itself reelected. Who would think that? We have to have the dream. We have to have the meeting. We have to create this design for quality. And you know what? We know what that looks like. We know exactly what that looks like. When the American College of Surgeons invented peer review, they did so by saying, everybody write down the care you provided. And then we'll all look at it and we'll all learn from that. And of course, it was all retrospective. And there will still be some role for that. But the fact of the matter is, we now know what constitutes good care. Evidence-based medicine doesn't control everything, but it controls a heck of a lot of what's going on in your organization. And when you adopt these kinds of protocols or these kinds of policies, like, for instance, the checklist that Dr. Pronovost and Dr. Gawande have been advocating, you can improve care absolutely starting today. We know exactly how to make care better. Dr. Berwick, who served a very brief but important stint as the head of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is very famous now for saying, and by the way, his background is extraordinary because you know he went to CMS from the Institute for Healthcare Quality Improvement, where through their efforts, many, many positive quality changes have been made. Dr. Berwick is very famous for saying now, we can't pretend we don't know how to take care of these people. Everything we need to do is being done somewhere. And then he goes through a litany of places that have no central line infections, places that have no inappropriate returns to surgery. I mean, he can go through place after place after place that is doing things to totally improve care, and every one of those things can be done in your organization. What we lack is the will and the way, and reorganizing this institution that is the medical staff is one way to do it. So, retrospective peer review, okay, it was great. We still have to do some of it, but let's define in advance what constitutes quality. And then this is our dream. Our dream is that we will create it in such a way that that's the way people provide care here. If you want to be part of our organization, you don't have to be, but if you want to be part of our medical staff, this is what we do. We use checklists. We do timeouts. We follow these protocols, or if for some reason the protocol doesn't work with this particular patient, we document contemporaneously. Why not? We know that. So, step number one, when you're creating this thing that replaces the traditional medical staff, we're going to have more emphasis on prospective quality. Peer review. Every one of you are in states that has a peer review statute. And the peer review statute says that you've got to do peer review, but in exchange, all of the information that you discuss will be confidential. And nobody can be forced to testify about it or liable for doing this. Now, I say all of you. The fact of the matter is there is a statute in all 50 states. But I know those of you from Florida or Kentucky say, not us. But you do have the statute. It's enforced differently in different states. But the point is this. These statutes were adopted because for public policy reasons, and the public policy was that the only people who can truly assess how well physicians are doing or help physicians improve their care are other physicians, And other physicians wouldn't be candid if they thought that third parties, namely malpractice plaintiffs or lawyers, could get access to this information. So that's where the confidentiality came from. And I know you work very hard to preserve the confidentiality. We work with you for that. We think it's really important. But now is the time to shout what you're doing from the rooftops. Now is the time not only to be providing the better care that we know you can, but to publish it. Because you know what? Your scores are being published anyway. There are hundreds of internet sites that seemingly tell anybody who has access to them, some of them are free, some of them you pay for, what your scores are, what your scores are on any number of things. And how do they know? They know one way right now, because all your peer review is confidential. The only way they know this is from your billing data. They can't tell about your quality from your billing data. They can try to deduce and that sort of thing, but right now, anybody who's searching the internet who wants to know what your quality is, unless you put your stuff out there, is doing it based on what these other sites say. Every insurance company you deal with knows how well you're taking care of patients. Insurance companies are starting to tier, you know. You've probably seen this. So what they say, they have divided, they can divide, and many of them have, divided their participants, physicians, hospitals, other healthcare entities, into tiers. So if you're the top tier, the insurance companies say to their insureds, we'll pay 100% of your care. If you want to go to Tier 2 doctor or a Tier 2 hospital, we'll pay 80% of your care. If you want to go to a Tier 3 doctor or Tier 3 hospital, we'll pay 50% of your care. People are already making decisions based on your quality data, and it's not very good data. Get your data out there. That's what this organization needs to be doing, generating it. And oh man, does that go over hard at first? Just at first. You guys started, everybody I've seen has to go through baby steps. I don't see any way to get from a standing start to where you need to be. So the steps people go through are like this. Well, first, we'll publish information about all the gastroenterologists. And you will see the report, and your name will be on it, but all the other GIs will be Dr. A, Dr. B, Dr. C, Dr. D. So you'll see how your patients do compared to them. Or the second step, and oh, by the way, I'm middle of the pack. What does this mean to me? It means to me your data stinks. I don't trust your data. How am I supposed to do anything based on this? Step number 2. You see all the GI's names. So you have an opportunity to see whose patients are doing better than yours. Hopefully that's a discussion then among the GIs so that everybody starts doing it the way the person who's doing it the best does it. Then the next step is let's let everybody on the medical staff see it because they might want to make a choice about what GI they refer to. Next step is let's put it out on a report card. It's going to happen sooner or later. So the issue is how good do you want your data to be? Because it's going to happen, you'd like you to be out there. I'd love this to be led by a medical staff organization. But you have to go through all of these processes, so you must start now or else you're going to live with other people's data. I don't think there's any shortcut. Every place I've ever seen, no matter where they are on that story I just told you, you must go through the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grieving. The denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression before you get to acceptance. So please, there's no time to waste. We're going to move from care in isolation to coordinated care. We know that. And the medical staff is antithetical to that. The medical staff is built around individuals. So we must change the organization to assist in getting to this point. There is absolutely no choice. Fee-for-service will become a dwindling part of our lives, and there will be single payment, so we have to be coordinating how we do it. Now, but don't we have a medical staff structure that's dictated to us? CMS, accrediting bodies, state licensing laws all say something about medical staffs, and the answer is yes, and that still doesn't limit your discretion. It means you must have a medical staff. It means your medical staff must have an active category. It means you must have a medical executive committee. It means you must have officers, but after that you're on your own. I mean, you have some other minor requirements, but nothing you can't work with. So what do you need to do? Just creative destruction. If you want to get from here to there, and by the way, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. This is what you have to have. This is why the medical staff exists. Well, the medical staff doesn't exist to have bylaws, but thank heavens for us that you have to have bylaws. CMS requires bylaws, accrediting bodies, so you do have to have bylaws for the foreseeable future. You have to have a credentialing, a peer review process. You have to have somebody who will take care of patients in the event of emergency. That's all you need. So that's all we need. Now we're limited by our imagination in what this medical staff looks like. What else is forcing change? Well, not only is care changing, but so much is happening. Some of the physicians on your medical staff are employed by your competitor. And so they might see patients in your hospital and take them to a competitor. And that creates strife inside. Or you're having more difficulty recruiting leadership or meeting performance objectives or the oversight or the need. All of these things are creating pressure for you to make changes. What is the very best new development I have seen in medical staff? So I'm going to show you medical staff models. But the very best new development I've seen seems subtle at first, but it's dramatic. It's something replacing clinical departments. Because clinical departments are sort of very, doctors know this word, but I can never say it. You know, what do you say when it's your arteries are all clogged? Arthrosclerotic or something like that. You guys know what I mean. They practically inhibit change. So this is what we're seeing. Some of you call them institutes, some of you call them centers of excellence, some of you call them service lines. Some of you, for some of you, they're marketing things. They're not a change in organization. You have the same people, the same structure, but you have a billboard that says Center of Excellence. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the real change, the real service line. And what it is care developed by and delivered by a multidisciplinary team. So I know that whatever of the models I showed you that you will end up with, this is going to be central to it. And I just want to show you how dramatic the differences are. This is not a change in terminology. I will tell you this is the difference between physician-centered care and patient-centered care. It is nothing less. And by the way, we're in an industry that has been shouting patient-centered care for 15 years without changing anything. But when you see what these organizations look like, you see what the changes are. Service lines, and I'm just using that word because sometimes when I say service lines, you guys think of services that are subs of departments. I'm talking about something like an institute or a center of excellence. The departments are organized around clinical specialties, the old academic model clinical departments. Service lines are organized around procedures or interventions like surgery or organ transplant or disease management like cancer or cardiovascular care, or around the patient population like geriatric or pediatric care. And it's not just physicians. It's multidisciplinary membership because none of these people or conditions are treated by physicians only. There are too many other people whose care must be coordinated to be most effective if, in fact, we're talking about patient-centeredness. The chiefs. Dr. Sagan spent a lot of time talking about who your department chairs are. And they're elected, they rotate, you twist their arms, you get them for any number of reasons. Sometimes because a physician thinks he can make a difference. I mean, sometimes you have leaders because they really do want to make a change. Often you get leaders, and I love it when I encounter this, because they were recruited to a group that has a leadership culture. So you know when you come into this group, the guy who founded the group was president of the medical staff. The next generation were presidents of the medical staff. I'm going to have to be president of the medical staff, but it's a leadership culture. So there are some good reasons that people are department chairs, but rotating elected leaders are not the best way to effectuate change. And that's not who leads these centers of excellence or these service lines. These are people who are recruited for this job, whose contract says you go off and get training for it, who says you give us a minimum of 3 years, that says this is what the chair of this service line does, this is who you report to. We're investing in you. If it's a small service line and it's 20% of your time, you're going to be paid fairly for 20% of your time. If it's bigger and it's 100% of your time, you're going to be paid fairly for 100% of your time. It's not going to be these rotating departments that get stipends just to say thank you. But not really to make it worth anybody's while. This focuses on coordination of care. In fact, almost every one of these has an individual or people whose responsibility it is to navigate on the patient's behalf and make sure that those who are providing care to this particular population get it. It's often co-managed. Cleveland Clinic is credited with sort of coming up with this model initially, and Cleveland Clinic had what they called a dyad model, where every one of these is led by a physician and a business person. Sometimes we see triad models, physician, nurse, business person, but they're people who are accountable. And they're accountable for all of these things, the budget, who works there, the protocols, all of it. All of these people whose expertise, whose service is necessary for the well-being of the populations are part of this service line. This isn't physicians only. I frankly cannot think of any reason there should be a meeting of physicians only. Physicians don't do anything related to patient care alone. They're dependent upon others. Everybody's dependent upon each other, and that's how these organizations work. I also, by the way, can't think of any reason there would be any meeting in a hospital, a healthcare organization, without physicians. The fact of the matter is, hospitals are now flat. Remember Tom Friedman's book, The World is Flat? The Internet has made every knowledge available to everybody on the same level. Well, you know what? The hospital is flat. We now know we all need each other. So to have these meetings in isolation just don't make any sense. Service lines, the care provided is absolutely protocol driven. And that really can't happen very much in departments. And by the way, not incidentally, once you have care packaged in this way, the organization is capable for contracting for bundled payments because you know what is the universe of care required by this population or this kind of disease. So whatever model you look for, I think that's going to be central to it. Now I'm going to show you a graph that you can't read, but that's okay because I'm going to break this down and show you this one piece at a time. I put it up here only because I want you to see the continuum of what we're seeing, where medical staffs are going. And on the right side, which you can't read, and so those of you who are only listening, don't feel bad. Nobody here can read it. So I will tell you, the right side is the traditional, the independent medical staff. And we go on the other side, all the way to the other extreme, is the medical staff where everybody is an employee or a contractor of the healthcare system, sort of the ultimate closed staff. And of course, as you know, there are examples of each, but let me go through them just to show you this transition. And then I'm going to slow down a little bit and take your questions or comments, but you will know that because this is available through the wonders of technology, if you have a question, please stand at the microphone so that your questions can be heard by others who are with us remotely. So let me just take a look at the traditional independent medical staff. First of all, how many people on your medical staff are really independent? How many people left on your medical staff aren't getting any money from the hospital or the healthcare system? Whether it's the stipend for being an officer or being a medical director or paying for call or service on a committee or any number of things. This independence is, in many of your organizations, illusory. But some people take great pride in being independent. Oh, by the way, how do we hasten the transition from clinical departments to service lines? Stop paying people who rotate through these positions. Stop the stipends. But this, we still call this the traditional independent medical staff, regardless of how much money there is. It's characterized by internal strife because of changes that are going on beyond your control. The issue of employed by versus the non-employed, because that's created some tensions in your organization, I know. Those who are employed by competitor, and now we always wonder about how can we really be effective or objective in peer review when everybody has different incentives here. There are hospitalists that change things too. And we know there's lots of good about the hospitalist program. But one of the other things we know is that it has contributed more than we would have wished to discontinuous care. You know, now you have people who are in the hospital for 4 days and they'll say, why don't I ever see the same doctor twice? Or why doesn't my own doctor ever come to see me? So while it provides a certain level of care and can be very good, we just adopted it as though it were a panacea, and we haven't addressed this continuity of care issue. And that's a big deal for a medical staff if it's worried about both things we talked about. The best care a patient can get and giving the physicians the best chance to be successful. So, and we know, because you're not there yet, but you're on the verge of being responsible for the patient's well-being, you are there to some extent, if you're not going to be paid for readmissions, for instance. You, the organization, which is not only the medical staff but the hospital, the healthcare system, has a stake in keeping these patients healthy. You care what's going on in other venues of care, and that needs to be built into whatever this new medical staff model is. And holy smokes, your traditional medical staff is not going to do that. They will tell you 100 times out of 100 what's going on in that physician's office is none of my business. And that's yesterday. Today's medical staff will never say that. So, what has the traditional medical staff turned into? It's sort of in atrophy while we've developed a parallel medical staff. Don't tell anybody. Because right now it's happening because we won't say it out loud. But the parallel medical staff starts with a chief medical officer, and then there's a chief quality officer, and then there's the chief of this and the chief of that, and then there are people that are hired to do bits and pieces of it. So the things we pretend the medical staff does is being done by these other people we're hiring to do it. So we're propping up the traditional medical staff. But if we say it out loud, people might be threatened by it. So that's model number one. Model number two is sort of what's old is new again, and that's the planned medical staff. That is, instead of having everybody on the medical staff who's providing care, let's figure out what care we want to provide and just have those physicians. You don't need perhaps 30 general surgeons, you need 4. But you need 4 who are going to provide the care that you've dreamed about, the care that is protocol driven, the care that is coordinated. So those things that are part of your dream are the criteria articulated. Our medical staff will be comprised of all physicians who meet our well-defined professional criteria, education, training, board certification, all those things that you do very well already. But then also those who meet our organizational criteria, who are committed to provide the same level of care across the continuum. That is our dream. And of course needs the dream. Here I call it a mission statement, and it needs everybody to be engaged, including people in the community. How many of you are in hospitals now where patients are invited to serve on some of your committees? What a difference that makes, huh? To see the care through the eyes of somebody who has just received it. And they're glad to be alive. It's like, it's like, I'll complain about air travel all day long, but you know what? I keep landing safely. And that's the way people are out of the hospital and they feel good, but they have a lot of things that they could complain about that if you knew could be made better. So we need to engage all of these people in our dream, because that's where our guidance is going to come from. We need well-defined patient care objectives, and it needs to be a policy of the organization. The next step, as we're moving towards the different models, is the semi-exclusive contract. Whatever physician is on our medical staff has a contract. We may need, right now you might have exclusive contracts with emergency or radiology or pathology, or, some of you have it with cardiac surgery. There are any number of exclusive contracts. By a semi-exclusive contract, I mean you might have 20 cardiologists that are in independent practices, separate practices, but the only cardiologists who will be part of the medical staff will be those who have the contract. And the contract will articulate the elements of this dream. The contract will articulate the manner in which care is provided, because one critical step, as you well know, one critical step to getting the performance you want, you need, you dream about, is articulating it in a way that people can accept, process, buy into, and learn how to do that. So that's all part of this contract. The next step is exclusive contracts. I don't think we're moving to an area where everybody's employed. I know very few hospitals or healthcare systems in the world that could possibly afford that. All of you are in organizations where your organization is probably losing between $100,000 and $200,000 per employed physician. You can't employ everybody. It costs too much. But you can have some type of contractual relationship with everybody, and that gets us to essentially this. Oh, and some of the things that we're doing wrong. Some people thought, well, if we move towards employment, that's going to help us because now everybody's on the same page. Everybody has more of a stake in it. But we forgot to tell employees what it was. We forgot to tell employees that, as part of being an employee, you take call. You show up when we need you. As part of being an employee, you work with the other people who provide care to your patients. As part of being an employee, you do buy into these protocols. As part of being an employee, you contribute to leadership. We expect you to be part of this. So now you may have a 50-50 medical staff, a classic hybrid, and the employees are like nowhere to be seen in leadership. And that makes the resentment a little bit greater. So articulate what it means to be an employee of this organization. Now, those are the different models. I'm going to get back to the few things you need, because remember, we're still governed by CMS, the Conditions of Participation and Accreditation Standards. But before I get to those, what questions or comments do you have so far? Yeah. Right. So the question is, I'll repeat it because she's sitting in the middle and can't get to a mic. The question is this: so if you have semi-exclusive contracts, what about the other people who don't have a contract? You know, interestingly, theoretically at least, every medical staff appointment is a contract because every physician who's appointed to your medical staff agrees to be bound by the bylaws, policies, rules, regulations. And they swear, they sign, they've read them and understand them. So, I mean, theoretically, everybody has agreed to this. We just forgot to tell them what the rules were. Or we forgot to keep the rules up to date. Many of these things we just talked about aren't even in our bylaws, policies, or rules or regulations yet. So, as you move to semi-exclusive contracts, you may, for a while, still have individuals who don't have personalized contracts. But increasingly, the same provisions are going to be woven into policies, procedures, standards that you actually share and do expect people to read. And, oh, by the way, have meetings about so that people get it. Understand what it means to be part of an organization. Understand what it means to coordinate care. We have to actually know each other. And we have to understand what these care paths are and how we can contribute to each other's well-being and to our patients. All right, then I'll keep going, but certainly stand in front of a microphone if you have any questions as we go along. So, oh, I forgot. This slide. You're still required to have a medical executive committee. The medical executive committee could be a committee of the whole, but you're required to have some leadership. One of the things that has thwarted our growth or transformation as a medical staff is the composition of the medical executive committee. Your MECs were traditionally comprised of department chairs, medical staff officers and department chairs. So, of course, well, I know I'm the only ophthalmologist, but I want to be a department because I want to be on the MEC. And so you have 27 departments, and some department chairs represent 50 people and some represent 2. But it's so important to have representation. Get representation off the MEC. If you want to form an MEC that helps you make the transition, what you really want are individuals who are selected because of their own qualifications and their own willingness to lead. You certainly would want the officers of the corporation, but beyond that, you want a few individuals who are willing to make a commitment to leadership. And so what if they all happen to be surgeons or pediatricians or whatever? We're not looking for particular clinical expertise here. We're looking for leadership. And it shouldn't be more than 7 people. Okay, so there's no magic number. And 7 is impossible. But when you take a look at the most effective committees, and I'm not an organization person, so I just memorize this and I'm just repeating it back to you. But what they tell me is 5 to 7 is the ideal number of a committee, and for every person over 7, you increase the complexity and decrease the efficiency of the committee. There may be some issues where you want to engage far more people, and they can certainly be invited to participate. In fact, I'm a big proponent these days of what I'm now calling town meetings as opposed to medical staff meetings. You know, meetings with less of an agenda, some formal agenda, but more of an opportunity to talk about things that matter. So rethink the composition of your MEC if you're planning to get to other models by baby steps. And then there's this, what I already referred to as your parallel leadership body. Medical staff categories. You're not required to have medical staff categories. I know you love them. And I know you have created a different category every time a unique situation has posed itself. And so now you have some categories that make sense and some that don't. If you want to have categories, that's okay. But think it through. Think if it really makes sense. And for heaven's sakes, don't give people hearings for not getting in the category they want. We used to say the active category, which was the most important, was somebody who had 50 admissions. Anybody been in hospitals long enough to remember that? And then we said 25 admissions, and then we said, oh, okay, 25 patient contacts, and now we say, okay, 5 patient contacts and you're active. But what we, and oh, by the way, if you call somebody up, that'll count as a patient contact. Because we so can't let go of our active medical staff. You know, if you want active staff, you can have it, but just have those that make sense. You'll have categories of people so that they can come in even if they don't have clinical privileges at the hospital. You may have categories for people who are just available on a consulting basis, just so people know who to call. But you don't need them. Have them if you want to, and only if they make sense, only if they advance what you're trying to accomplish. Medical staff officers. You know, one of the things that you guys do, a big job of yours, is to, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way at all, but what you guys do is you continually train new medical staff officers. And I think you think of that as an important part of your work too. You're the guys who know the bylaws, you're the guys who know the rules, you know how to do peer review, you know what matters, you know the ins and outs, and sometimes you do a phenomenal job. And sometimes you have leaders that you can hardly bear to lose. And you can coerce them to do another term or two. I know, I've seen you do that, and you guys are actually pretty coercive. You know, you have to bring in chocolate chip cookies every couple of days, but so I know how important leadership is to you to enable this to happen efficiently. Maybe we haven't made leadership important enough. We haven't made a high enough priority of leaders to attract, groom their successors. And that becomes important. Oh, by the way, this is another area where meetings matter. People will be engaged if they think they can make a difference. If they think that the time, the effort, the energy they put into it can make a difference in the lives of patients or in the lives of their colleagues. And that requires a lot of conversation. It requires a big dream. It requires the ability to work together. So rethink who your officers are and articulate that in your medical staff bylaws. So this is my question to you. If the American College of Surgeons popped in here today with the same question they struggled with in 1918, they said, holy smokes, who's taking care of the whole patient population? What would the ACS design? I don't think it would be what our medical staffs have grown into. I think it will be an organization where the physicians believe they have the support of colleagues, where they have the guidance, where they have some input into what these protocols and rules are, where they have the ability to follow them because there are meetings of the service line, for instance, of the people who work on these patients with me. For instance, I watched one being born before my very eyes. It's like watching a baby bird hatch practically. It's so beautiful. But I watched this service line being born in this hospital over the course of a couple of years, and it was done because they were so happy that this guy who'd grown up in town was coming home to practice because he'd done his super-duper joint fellowship and he developed a good reputation, but he and his wife both wanted to come home. So they visited the hospital. He wanted to be there, but he said, this is really chaotic. The way I practice is I have physical therapists and nutritionists and other people who work with all my patients all the time. And every Monday morning at 6 o'clock, we'd sit down and we talk about the patients we're going to do this week. And I have a physical therapist. If my patient's ready to get up at 10 o'clock at night for the first time or 2 o'clock in the morning, I have physical therapists there. And we talk every Friday afternoon about how these patients are doing and what we do differently. And the physical therapists go to the patient's home, so I get the patients out of here and moving. I mean, he had this whole rule about why his patients did so well. And that was the beginning of the service line in this hospital. It requires a lot of meetings. But to talk to everybody who's engaged there, everybody, the nurses, the PTs, all of the aides, there are a lot of different people who don't even have clinical licensed titles who are engaged in keeping these patients mobile. And they're part of the team, and they meet together, and they contribute. So I think that's what it would look like more. What are the immediate goals of this? No matter what healthcare reform turns out to be. I mean, you don't know, I don't know, whether the elections will make any difference, what's going to come out statutorily, but we know this. We know we're never going back. We know that we have seen the way care can be better, and now our charge is to help disseminate that. And that's where you want your experts, the physicians and others on your medical staff. What matters, no matter what, is quality, access to care, and providing it at the most appropriate cost. And that's the way you build your medical staff. What questions? What comments? Do we have any from the, okay, so I'm supposed to look at the screen? Okay. What I will do is read to you, for those of you who want to stay, the questions that have been posed to us remotely. And we only have 3. And the first is, can sample bylaws language be provided showing the service line and care coordination model? Yes, it can. I don't have it, but you could make the bylaws out of those slides. Do they have our slides? Okay. Okay. What do you think will be the greatest challenges, changes to the medical staff services offices? And that's going to be, I think, leading this. Knowing what the options are, getting your physicians used to it. It's going to be exactly what you've been doing, but on steroids. Because now you have people who are very nervous about this and who aren't necessarily sure that it's the right thing. So you have to become quite the salesperson. Do we recommend having allied health professionals on the MEC? You know, I don't recommend one way or the other. It's interesting that in the new conditions of participation, CMS has specifically said a podiatrist can be a member of the medical staff. Even before they said that, we've worked with places where there's a podiatrist and members of the medical staff. So I don't necessarily think the person's discipline matters. It's the amount of respect, the amount of leadership, the amount of work that that person's willing to do. So with that, oh yes, thank you.
A lot of our medical schools are structured around the traditional medical staff clinical department model. Are you aware of any schools that are switching to this new model service lines?
I am not personally aware of anybody who's switching. Does anybody here know if any medical schools are doing any training differently in light of all of this? I'm sorry, I don't, but thank you for the question. I'll look into that.
Can you comment at all on how telemedicine and telehealth is going to factor into these models that you're describing?
Oh, thank you. Yes, the issue of telehealth is a very big deal. I mean, we've seen extraordinary work, care provided remotely because of the wonders of telehealth. Those people remotely, however, don't need to be part of your medical staff, but those on your medical staff, that is, those who are part of the organizations who are setting the rules and overseeing quality need to be very aware of the telehealth providers because that needs to be measured as well. Your responsibility for quality of care won't just be for the people who have admissions records and discharge. It will be for everybody who's receiving care as part of your organization, so that'll be critical. Thanks so much for being here, and good luck in your good work.